sign me in, Jack?
Folks, this should take about 40 minutes today. So I think we'll have plenty of time here. You might even get out early.
Then you have your fan.
Yeah.
But it'll give you plenty of chance, I hope, to ask questions or to make comments here. So again, let me reiterate what I said before. Don't be afraid to ask questions or to make comments during the presentation itself. And one other thing I'd like to say before we begin here is, remember at the first meeting, I dedicated this, and I still want to reiterate that, to those who have worked in the church who will not be named in this presentation at all, because a lot of different people have done a lot of different things for our congregation that they never would get credit for. And I'd at least like to recognize them in this way, if we can. If we begin today, we're going to be through by probably 25 after, unless there are a lot of questions or comments. Anything anyone wants to say before we begin? All right, well, let's get started and see how it goes. We left off last time. Wait a minute, let me make sure this is working here. Yep, looks like it works pretty well here. We left off last time with the death of Pastor Sala, if you remember, back in 2002. And so that was also, of course, the 50th anniversary of Epiphany as a congregation. And so that's where we're going to pick up right now. Bishop James Mauney attended the 50th anniversary celebration on January 6th of 2002. And by June, the Sala Chapel had been added, the balcony stairs had been completed, the chancel had been renovated. We finally got the communion rail moved down to where it is now here, and the parking expanded. Carolyn Huntley had retired as leisure time leader at that time, and Iris Will took her place. Pastor Price had started meeting once a month for lunch with the men of the congregation. And of course, that's something that we've continued ever since, or at least right up to the COVID shutdown. And then it shut down for a year or so, but of course it now has resumed again. In November, Epiphany provided 42 families with Thanksgiving baskets. And I think that's quite a change from back in the 70s when we provided maybe 4 or 5 baskets there. By the end of 2002, offerings were at $17,543 higher than expenses, which left us with an unrestricted surplus of $199,302, almost $200,000 in unrestricted surplus. In other words, surplus over and above, what we had budgeted and so on. I think that's amazing. Leisure Time at this time had 247 members from 80 different congregations in the area. Of these, 59 were here from Epiphany. In other words, Epiphany's Leisure Time group had less than a fourth of the membership of the organization here. On June 11th, the Women's Circles celebrated their 50th anniversary. Remember, they came into existence very shortly after the church did here. By the end of the year, new carpet had been installed in the chancel and down the center aisle. of the sanctuary, and it was announced that some stained glass would be installed in the Sala Chapel. On January 5th, 2003, the last of the 50th anniversary celebrations took place. A commemoration was held with a musical that included the handbell ringers, singers, organ, and trumpet. And we were really lucky that we had, oops, that's not what I intended it to be.
Oh, that's the stairs going in.
Oh, wait a minute, I know what happened, I think. Wayne, I don't think we got this, wait a minute. We should be on, so what is page 300? That should be about right. I apologize, folks.
Oh.
That looks like all stairs construction.
Yeah, let's,
Oh, that's it. Ooh, wow. Oh, that's the
stairs?
construction pictures of the stairs to the balcony.
okay, yeah, that's, we need those.
Okay.
Let me do that.
Oh, we were here for that, but do you remember it?
I don't either. You, it's only 20 years ago.
Well, our kids were very young.
That's when our kids were young. Our kids were in high school.
And I remember when
Used to be.
Who's your voice for singing?
I'm looking for,
I remember
for
RC
Kevin Barker.
and
Those pictures are all.
You turn 40?
yeah, big contribution.
Hey, Kevin Barker.
I mean, I know this
Yeah,
kind of
okay, I see what happened.
Eric's
I've got,
36.
okay, yeah, this is,
So, you know.
this is what I was looking for.
Our kids were young and we were very busy.
Yeah, we were blessed to have Kevin Barger as our organist choir director. And in 2004, the Examiner also presented a nice article on him. And this was the article from the Examiner. Here, I'm not going to give you time to read it all. We'd have to scroll down on it here. Also, in 2003, the youth presented a pancake breakfast, and I realize these are not youth, they're making the pancakes. But this was the only picture of a pancake breakfast I had. So this is the picture you get. Here.
The youth serve.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what they did. Yeah.
The transition team finally wrapped up its work after a year and a half of work, and council accepted its proposals. And these were a very serious change in our previous doings here, folks. What they said was we should actually replace our committees with ministry teams. And these ministry teams would not be chaired by council members, as they had always been in the past. Also, they recommended 2 new staff members, an administrative assistant who would take over the secretarial duties, among other things, and a director of Christian education. In March, the congregation approved of these changes. Later, Epiphany would receive a letter thanking it for 60 Easter baskets and 280 pounds of food donated to the Lamb's Basket. And in July, council authorized a committee to investigate the possibility of establishing a columbarium. That fall, Hurricane Isabel affected the whole eastern coast, including, of course, Richmond and thus Epiphany. And here we suffered over $70,000 in repairs to our roofs alone. And that doesn't include the Star Lodge here, which also suffered damage. Okay. I thought you might be interested in this picture, an overhead shot.
Yeah.
My hands are shaky, so I don't know if I can keep the red thing on, but there's the Star Lodge, of course. There's the garage. And here's, if I can keep it on it, Price Hall and the kitchen. And then, of course, Sala Chapel here. And here, of course, is a sanctuary and the relatively new narthex on it here. And then back here, of course, is the educational wing. But notice, if you will, tree down there, There's a tree down there. In fact, I'll show you a couple of the pictures of the damage that we suffered here.
Yeah, look at telephone pole too.
Yeah.
That's right.
You can see the garage over there, so it gives you sort of the location.
That's
You
wild.
see the Star Lodge there. And you see on the other side of the garage, tree down too. Okay. And I think that's about all of the pictures of the damage we suffered. I haven't mentioned much about the property ministry team, but our plant has expanded, of course, and so there may be less grass to mow, there may be less trees to trim, but there are certainly more and more complicated structures to maintain. And here's a picture of a later evaluation of our roofs by Jim Anderson. And what he was concerned about was that too many of our warranties were expiring at the same time. And he wanted to get them spread out. And I found out from John Hartman that Jim was also worried not just about the roofs, but he was worried about our heating and air conditioning systems. Our air conditioners and heat pumps, apparently all the warranties came due at the same time. And he thought, if we have to replace all these at the same time, we're gonna go broke here. So part of Jim's job was to try to get those spread out over time. By January, Pastor Price was concerned that even though Epiphany's membership had grown, there were fewer attending on Sundays. And the council was also worried and discussed that decline. And this was especially distressing because 2004 was the 20th anniversary of Price ministry, and also the 25th anniversary of his ordination. And it meant, of course, that we had failed to achieve that part of 500 by 50 to get 50, to get 500 people at our services by the 50th anniversary. Here we were 2 years past that already. 2004 was also the year that Christy Van Olinda became the Director of Christian Education and Small Group Ministry, and the year that the congregation adopted that new constitution, which did away with committees and set up ministry teams in their place, with each team reporting to one member of the hired staff. Now, I thought it was sort of interesting. Pastor Price had the property committee report to him here. It was a momentous year in many ways. When it was learned that the synod had a budget shortfall, Epiphany gave the synod an extra $12,000 to help ease the problem. The congregation that year donated 1,500 pounds of food to the lamb basket. They held Caritas for 40 homeless in in October. And in November, they provided the needy with 110 coats and 40 Thanksgiving baskets. And then in December, they provided Christmas gifts to 73 Crestview children. Epiphany was also chosen by the National Church to test out a new liturgy. And on top of these accomplishments, members were still working here to refurbish the Star Lodge from the 2013 Hurricane Isabel that had caused the damage. In November, the Examiner alerted folks to the fact that over 300 people or families had visited Epiphany so far that year, and urged them to keep their eyes open to greet new people. This was something they didn't really have to say to our one surviving charter member, Betsy Williamson, whose 95th birthday will be recognized today here. Betsy, even though she sat up front most of the time, would come to the back after the service where the pastors were meeting, greeting the people coming out. And she would look for people that were new, and she'd always try to greet them and make them feel welcome here. And Betsy had been doing that throughout time here. And I think it's something that maybe all of us can sort of take into account here. It's that type of thing that makes a church, I think, a wonderful place to be. In 2005, thanks to a donation, Epiphany was able to make DVD copies of the service for the homebound. In June, the Labyrinth was rolled out in Price Hall. The acquisition of Price Hall had made it possible for us to acquire a canvas labyrinth that could be laid out on the floor when there weren't other activities, so that people could walk on it while praying. And Charlotte Ulrich, who headed the Health and Wellness Committee, put articles in the Examiner explaining what a labyrinth was and its history, how it was something that had been back in medieval cathedrals, where on the floor of the cathedrals they would put labyrinth, it'd be right in stone on the floor, so that people could walk it. Because most people, of course, back in those days, there was no way they were ever going to get to the Holy Land. So this was a way of allowing them to do something in lieu of going to the Holy Land. They could walk this labyrinth and pray. And of course, Charlotte was urging that our members do the same in here when we had the labyrinth out. That spring, Pastor Price again emphasized the group ministry model, as it was called. And Christy Van Olinda offered several training sessions on it. A program of Timothy ministers who would work with youth was also added. And rather than 2, Epiphany sent 3 persons to the Lamb's Basket each week. Later that would be increased to 4. In the fall, communion was offered at all worship services. But actually when the congregation was polled, only 28% preferred the weekly communion. The rest wanted to keep the every other week communion that we'd had previously here. Sort of interesting. In the synod in 2005, Jim Mauney was re-elected as bishop, and the entire ELCA at that time consisted of 18,000 pastors and 5 million baptized members in some 10,657 congregations. At Epiphany, people were asked to wear a name tag on Rally Day, and there was a rededication of the Star Lodge on that day. We finally had it refurbished. Donations were collected for those in Louisiana who had been devastated by Hurricane Katrina. By fall, the congregation was presented with plans for a columbarium. And toward the end of 2006, the congregation gave its go-ahead for such a columbarium. In 2006, also, 43 new members joined the congregation, among them the Bossermans. But that spring, Warren Smith had died. The average attendance that year was 411. So we had increased membership since the 1990s, but we were still a long way from 500, a figure what we have never reached. About a ton of food was collected through several food drives that year. This is just one example, loading up a truck with bags of food here. And also that year, 52 needy children were given gifts through the Christmas tree. Now, Kevin Barger was well acquainted with the new hymnal, having attended a 3-day training session in Chicago on it. And the December Examiner urged people to purchase a copy of this new hymnal as a part of their Christmas shopping. Kevin also assisted Mark England and heading up the 50 Epiphany walkers and runners among the 20,000 who participated in the Monument Avenue 10K race. I'm amazed that we got 50 people out for that. And after Mark left, of course, it was all in Kevin's hands. And we had that Team Epiphany for several years. 2007 was a year of change in many ways. The new hymnal was adopted. The columbarium was dedicated. Iris Will completed her time as leisure time director. Beryl Wernham retired after 19 years as secretary. And in June, Hannah Christofferson became the new administrative assistant. And Christy Van Olinda became the leisure time director. It was also the year that visitation pastor William Wake died, but that summer would see Pastor Tom Bosserman accept the position of visitation pastor, and he held it for many years. Adolf Platz went into assisted living in Harrisonburg, which of course brought changes to both the archives and the endowment, which were his babies in both cases. He'd been the leading light behind them. The biggest change, though, was probably the leaving of Associate Pastor Mark England, who had accepted a call to Houston, Texas, though actually he would not leave until April of 2008. On December 29th, Christy Van Olinda and Nate Huffman were married. And earlier in September, Hannah Christofferson and Rob Hamlin had tied the knot. Unfortunately, it was also the year that another driver coming up Monument Avenue did not stop, drove up onto the property, hit the base of the cross, and killed himself. I suspect he was not only inebriated, but probably didn't have his seatbelt on here. We have had one other driver, at least that I know of, since then who's done the same thing, except he drove up, instead of striking the cross, he struck the church property, but he didn't kill himself. The columbarium was built between the Solid Chapel and the Star Lodge, in a place where there had been this small flower garden. And here's a picture of what the columbarium was supposed to look like. And here's a picture of what it actually does look like. One interesting anomaly in 2008 was that Easter fell on my 76th birthday, March 23rd. It's the first time I could remember Easter being on my birthday, or what I should say is my birthday being on Easter here. The early Easter can be is March 22nd, and it hadn't fallen on that date since 1818, and it would not fall on that date again till 2285. So none of us are ever going to see it that early. The earliest we can see it is March 23rd. Now, Easter falls on the first Sunday after the first full moon that is on or after March 21st. I will repeat that. Easter falls on the first Sunday after the first full moon that is on or after March 21st. And the only reason I know that is because the examiner put it in at the time that happened here. Easter was also the last date for the use of the kneelers. We took the kneelers out from the pews because they were becoming increasingly inoperable. And this was the year also when the nation fell into the deepest recession since the Great Depression. And Pastor Price did actually make mention of that. And as a matter of fact, he also made mention of the fact that both the nation and the church were aging, with the average age of Lutherans being 55. Now, where he got that information, I do not know. The call committee, however, did recommend a young person as our new associate pastor. And
Looks like a kid.
the January 2009 examiner
So funny.
reported that he had accepted the call, and he was installed in February, which, by the way, was the same month that Adolf Platz died. The April 2009 examiner contained information on what you needed to know if you were facing a mortgage foreclosure. The nursery school made 7 deep dish apple pies for our Caritas guests. And we were members of an organization called ACTS, A-C-T-S, which stood for Area Congregations Together in Service. It was a partnership of 31 faith-based organizations here in Central Virginia. And it had, since its founding in 2006, loaned over $270,000 to 700 people. Its main focus was preventing homelessness. On July 21st, oh, this is another picture, I apologize, of Pastor Martin now with Chris Price there at the altar. On July 21st, the youth and leaders from Epiphany joined 37,000 other Lutherans in a work trip to New Orleans to help with the cleanup and recovery, which was still underway from Katrina. We didn't actually go to New Orleans. I think we went to Slidell, Louisiana. Here's another picture of the group here. Okay.
Some people worked in Slidell, some people worked in New Orleans.
Is that the way it was?
Yeah.
Okay. At the end of summer, you could tell that the recession was affecting Epiphany when it was announced that in order to save money, people were asked to bring their own plates and silverware to the Rally Day picnic that year. That fall, it was announced that more ushers were needed as well as more teachers for Sunday school. And this is an example of a Sunday school class here. And in the first blood drive since 2001, 27 units of blood were collected.
That's Chris Nina.
And I think that's Chris. Is it Chris Nido being having his blood pressure checked by Carl Erickson? There, a thank you letter was received for the youth for picking 58 pounds of okra and peppers, but interestingly, for a Methodist ministry. I don't know how they got hooked up together, but they did. The January 2010 Examiner said that, quote, 2009 has been a difficult year for everyone, unquote. But the Christmas musical had been a big success with 136 participants, and it resulted in 200 pairs of shoes being shipped to Uganda. Also, 265 visitors had attended Epiphany in 2009. Now, folks, we've discussed basically the building of our physical structure, except, of course, for this very latest one, which is outside our purview here. But what we haven't done is, other than, we did look at the services in the sanctuary last week, but we haven't discussed much about the use of these spaces. And so I'd like to do that right now for a very short time. Okay. First of all, I think we need to say that the Sala Chapel was used, of course, not only for final services, but it was also used for Sunday school classes and for other small groups, and of course for musical groups as well, though the choir had used many different spaces throughout the years, as you can see from this photo here. The fellowship hall which is now known, of course, as Price Hall, though was a major addition and resulted in various uses, including, as you can see here, major dinners. Also included use as Sunday school areas. Got a couple of pictures of that here. And for other purposes, blood drives, I don't have a picture of that. Also congregational meetings. Basketball games, I don't have any pictures of that either. But also Caritas shelter. And we just mentioned its use for the labyrinth here. But it has had other effects too. Up to the time it was built, events such as Rally Day picnics were held outside. Now such events were held here in Price Hall. This has opened up the outside spaces for other uses, such as for gardens. Oop, another use of Price Hall. I've got one more picture of Price Hall. Here.
It's John and Annette.
And now, a picture of how it opened up the outside spaces for the use of gardens. And the adjacent kitchen, of course, has also had considerable use. And I've got a number of pictures of that, and I'll show you. You recognize these two folks here, or three? This is a better overall picture of the kitchen here. Going through the line, getting the food. Another picture of the same.
Sherry.
And a final picture. And of course, that's
God.
Rob Hamlin. This is a picture of when they got the food for Chris Price's last meal here, I guess you'd say, here. And that's Rob Hamlin, who, of course, was a professional chef here in the background, holding his hands up with his hat on there. Okay. Now, other areas of the church that have been used for various purposes, too. Here, of course, is the commons between the sanctuary and the office space. Now, this was a picture that had to be taken between 1993 and 2002. Anyone understand why? That's right. There are not the stairs in that particular picture there. Another picture of the commons area.
So big without the
And of course, this little, we can't see it, but the inset there is where the coffee maker was and where the sink was and so on. I assume this is a picture of a council meeting. And again, this picture must have been earlier, and I'm pretty sure this was Vacation Bible School, but you can see the stairs were not in yet in this particular picture. Around Christmas time. And putting together the examiner to send out to folks here. And a couple of last pictures. Again, a council meeting. That's obvious because Chris is sitting at the end there. Now, another area was the parlor. And of course, the parlor could be used for weddings, adult Sunday school classes, as well as for committees, or I should say ministry teams here. And we shouldn't forget also, I've got one more picture of the parlor here. We shouldn't forget also that we have a Sunday school wing, even though it's been with us for many years. And I've just got two pictures of it. one of a Sunday school class, and another of the opening for Sunday school held in the upper room there. Now, I've got one other picture that I just had to put in someplace. And here it is, I hope. And Chris and Scott Dietrich, this was taken at a Vacation Bible School meeting, and I'm sure they were showing off the kids there. Now, Pastor Philip Martin impressed everyone from the moment he arrived. And when Chris Price announced that he would retire as of April of 2013, and this is a picture of Chris in his very last time at the church here as pastor. And here, of course, he's doing the children's sermon here. But immediately people began thinking of Philip as a possible replacement. And when the bishop met with us and suggested that we should look at Philip, it seemed to sort of clinch it. And he was the only person who was really seriously considered. Now, just several, I've got one more picture of Chris here at the ending of that last time he was our pastor here. Now, just several facts that I'd like to bring out. By the end of 2013, the endowment stood at $808,792. In other words, it was well on the way to $1 million by that time. So I think we owe Adolf many thanks in many ways here. Now, I really haven't mentioned enough, I think, about our music programs. And I just wanted to give you a couple of pictures as reminders here. You know Scott Dietrich, and I think this was the children's choir here, but I'm not absolutely certain of that. And another picture, and this shows, of course, the choir on the right, but also the bell choir over on the left, if you look. And music is an exceedingly important part of our activities. And unfortunately, in a program like I'm giving here, we cannot do it justice because music involves sound rather than pictures. And so there's no way we can adequately do it. And folks, I've got another picture here that's unrelated to any of these things, but I think you'd like to see. And this is a picture, of course, of Epiphany. You're looking down Monument there, and this is Horsepen going this way here. I should be able, there's Horsepen, and here's Monument. And while you're looking at that, I'd just like to say a few things. Back when Pastor Robert Sala was pastor, I had been put on a committee to visit those who had not been in church for a while and try to urge them to come back, but also to try to find out why they weren't coming. I only remember one of those visits. It was to a man who said he wouldn't come back until Pastor Sala left. I don't know if I remembered to ask him why or why he didn't simply change his membership to a different church, if that were the case. I dutifully reported this back along with my other findings, as did the other members of the committee. And I'm certain that Pastor Sala was hurt by that fact when he read it. And I know he read it because he mentioned it to me later. As human beings, we are all flawed creatures, and we can hurt or disregard each other. We Christians understand this because each Sunday we're constantly reminding ourselves that we're sinful human beings, and to be sinful is to be flawed. Thus, any human entity, such as a church, is also going to be flawed. And certainly Epiphany over the years has had its flaws. But due to our understanding of this nature of ours, that we understand that we have good points too, as does the church on the synodical and on the national level. And we can be proud of our congregation when we support the church on those levels. But we can also be proud of ourselves, I think, when on the local level, we support those who need help or have less than we do, whether it be through quilt making or Caritas or helping immigrant families or in a dozen other ways over the years. I've got ways that I haven't even mentioned in these programs. I haven't mentioned our help for Habitat for Humanity. I haven't mentioned the fact that we give food to the Hull Street shelter. We're still doing that here. But because of these things, I find Epiphany to be a very sweet place. And it's understandable that I think most of you agree with me about that. And so it's understandable why we might agree with Marie Antoinette's statement, if not her reason behind it, that back when the French Revolution, before the French Revolution, she was told that the French people didn't have bread to eat. And she naively said, well, let them eat cake. And as proof that I think we believe in her statement, I present the following evidence.
Yep. All good.
You like our sweets.
The most pictures you had of cake.
25.
Picking out that feed.
I'm sure there's been way more than 25.
And folks, that ends our history of Epiphany. Any comments or questions?
It was wonderful.
Good job.
Thank you. You did a great job.
And again, I told you we'd get out early. Any questions or any comments? Okay,
Wonderful. It was
That's it.
great.
Did a great job.
Shirley.
Fun going back and
Yeah.
moving.
Could you
Yeah, there's a lot if I get over there.